Hello and welcome to Kels Big Picture podcast. Thank you so much for being with me here today, and I'm excited to share with you our topic for today, which is self-talk saga. Quite often we are rolling around in this drama that we create in our own minds, and today I want to talk to you about how we can actually change our perspective with our internal dialogue. So we're going to chat about, that voice in your head and how it impacts on your health and on your self-image and self-worth, and how that is then repeated in generational life. So I just want to talk to you first about what is self-talk, and it's essentially that internal voice in our minds, the one that pops up when there's a situation in front of us and we need to either react or respond, or sometimes it's the little inner voice, which happens to me quite a lot, that pops into your mind after the fact and maybe wants to be your inner critic and tell you about what you should have done or what you could have done a little bit better. And the internal voice is focused sometimes on ourself, or sometimes that internal voice will be focused on to our beliefs or opinions that we have of someone else. And it's important to understand that either way, no matter where its focus is, if it's not being so much positive, then it can sometimes really impact on what we can take away from a situation at any given time. It's a mix of conscious and unconscious beliefs. So, what we are seeing and what we are interpreting in combination with maybe what's playing out in the back of our mind based on our past experiences or what we've been taught or told. So there's some really interesting research on our self-talk and how it really impacts on our health and well-being. And Positive Psychology Today has cited these really interesting studies, and I just wanted to share them with you. So Kaiser, Smeets, and Giacomin in 2013 conducted a study where they asked patients with anorexia nervosa to walk through a doorway that became increasingly narrower. Participants with the disorder began to turn their bodies when the doorway was 40% wider than their shoulders, compared to participants who had no diagnosis, so no anorexia, who began to turn their body sideways when the doorway was 25% wider than their shoulders. So that's quite interesting that the person who's self-talk, or with anorexia, who has that negative self-image of themselves and their bodies, believed that they were bigger than what they were and began to turn themselves much sooner than someone who didn't suffer from anorexia. And that impact of our self-talk impacts on our actions as well. And so it's important for us to understand how the two are really related. And so the next study that they cite, Conroy and Metzler in 2004, explores the ways of self-talk and how it impacts on cognitive anxiety and sports performance. Now, I find this really, really interesting. So they looked at the state-specific self-talk. So the way that athletes spoke to themselves when they were failing or when they were succeeding, while they were wishing for success and while they were fearing failure. So they measured these alongside expressions of situation-specific trait performance anxiety, which is fear of failure, fear of success, or sports anxiety. And they found the strongest results for self-talk associated with fear of failure and sports anxiety. Essentially, the athletes experienced higher anxiety when using negative self-talk. Now, that seems fairly self-explanatory. And for someone who's coached students, kids, teenage kids for a really long time, it was really evident that the way that a student or a player spoke to themselves, or an athlete spoke to themselves, would literally quite literally play out on the court or the field. And so it's really important to understand that the fears that people create in themselves are often fears that they've created in their own minds because they're fearing failure and fearing judgment. And that's important for us all to understand, and it's probably really common in life itself. Now, another study by Kendall and Treadwell in 2007 also explores the way that self-talk affects anxiety, and they investigated self-talk as a predictor for anxiety in children. and without a diagnosis of anxiety disorder. So they found that reducing negative self-talk mediated substantial treatment gains in the children with the diagnosis. So what they're getting at there is if they can teach kids to change the way they speak to themselves, it reduces the need for treatment for anxiety. And that's really, really important for us to know. And if we as parents or role models to others understand that if we can help people change the way they talk to themselves, we can actually help them and their health in the future. So there's a few other studies that also linked that self-talk to our ability to learn. And if we're telling ourselves that we're unable to do something, a big task, then we're not likely to do it. Whereas when we bring it into small, usable chunks, they seem more achievable. So we're less fear of failing, or we know that we've got a better chance of getting it done. So our prediction of success is higher, and we're more likely to think positively and speak positively about ourselves in those situations, and therefore more likely to learn. There's lots of studies that follow along this path, but really what we need to understand is that we have control of our self-talk because we are the person creating that self-talk, and we actually need to think about our relationship with the person who is inside our own mind. And we do spend more time with ourselves than what we do with anyone else. So we listen to our own self-talk more than we listen to anyone else. And so we really need to understand that if we've got a really positive relationship with that little person in our own head, then it's going to play out in a much more positive way as well. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about your internal voice. And I want you to think about, your answers to these. You can even write them down if you want to. But it does give us a bit of an insight into how we feel about our own internal voice. So I want you to think about this. What would be his or her name? How would you imagine that person to look like or even sound like? How does that internal voice make you feel? Does it empower you or does it degrade you? Does it improve you or does it reduce you? Does it reflect you or does it reject you? Does it make excuses for you or does it become your excuse? So we need to understand that relationship with our internal voice, and those questions might be a really good prompt or starting point for you to actually stop and think about your own self-talk and your own inner voice and how it impacts on your day-to-day life. So we can actually remodel our inner voice. And the beauty of that is when we remodel our inner voice, we can actually remodel the way we think. We can change our mindset. And mindset is huge when it comes to, our ability to grow and learn, to explore, to push ourselves outside our comfort zone. And so we need to learn to change the way that we talk to ourselves so that we can change our mindset. So powerful and positive self-talk can change our entire mindset, which can affect your actions and in turn have massive impacts on how successful you are in any journey in life and how you interpret any obstacle that you face. The self-talk that we have with ourselves is really important. It can be the difference between finding the positive and negative lessons in every situation. Positive self-talk has been shown to improve our mood and our self-esteem and our physical health. Negative self-talk can hinder our ability to learn or limit our growth, stunt achievement, and it can drag us down. Positive self-talking, on the other hand, tends to empower us with encouragement for trying new things, building new confidence in ourselves and how we feel about life's challenges. So there's a few, things that we need to factor in here. And it's interesting that over time, with my experience, 25 years, helping people learn and grow, I've noticed the growth of the growth of, I call it the why bother phenomenon. So there is, people don't often admit to negative self-talk. They'll often talk themselves up in front of other people. But in actual fact, when you see this phenomenon in action, the why bother phenomenon, you understand that probably that self-talk, what they're saying about themselves isn't actually how they're feeling about themselves. And so therefore their inner voice isn't actually congruent with what they're talking about. And I see this in students, I see this in athletes a lot. And it is, well, why would I bother doing that? So they're creating an excuse for themselves. Why would I bother doing that when, this could very well happen? Why would I bother working really hard and exercising? Because, that's a waste of energy. But really what they're fearing is not being successful or not achieving their goals. Or why would I bother, putting my hand up and answering questions or talking to that particular person when really they're fearing, judgment from that person, or they feel inadequate in that situation. This why bother phenomenon is actually, I feel like it's really growing, and it's something that we need to really get a hold of, whether it be within ourselves, and or whether it be within our kids or other people that we are influencing, because as we've talked about, we're role models whether we choose it or not. And it's important for us to make sure that we catch ourselves in those situations. Now, look, when we do fear failure, or when we do fear societal critique, we are more likely to have negative self-talk. So how do we overcome that? How do we get through, get past these fears? And I think one thing that's really, really important for us to do is that we have these discussions. It can be a discussion of or for the ages. Every single person throughout history has feared these things, and yet some people succeed and some people don't. And what is it that's holding us back? And I really encourage you to have those conversations and those discussions with family and friends. When you hear that, oh, why would I bother? Pull them up and say, well, why wouldn't you bother? When you hear that, I suppose that sentiment of, it's not worth my time, really question them and go, well, why isn't it worth your time? Because there's a lot of people who miss out on growth, on exploration, on success, and learning from failure because they don't even put themselves in those situations. And I really feel like having those conversations is just so important, so that we can create that generational change that we need and people can actually live their best lives. So, so important. So, what do we do to change our self talk? I've got 7 strategies here, and I'm just going to throw them out to you. And I want you to today at least pick one that you're going to start with. Every action that every goal that we set ourselves just requires us to take one step at a time. So you don't have to do all of these things all together or all at once. They might be a one step at a time scenario. And I really encourage you to embrace that we don't have to run towards our goals. We can just take one step at a time. The speed that you get there is totally up to you. But the first thing that I want you to challenge yourself with today is to create a character for your inner voice. Um, you know, who do you want it to be, or who do you need it to be? And create that character in your mind. Or perhaps if you've got the Debbie Downer inner critic, give it a name that suits it and be prepared to own it, because you do own your inner voice. They are not in charge of you. Okay, so it's important that we understand that. First step. The second strategy is to catch your inner critic. So don't let your inner voice be a critical parent or critical peer. You don't need to impress your inner voice. You are who you are. Be authentic and be true to yourself, and keep your inner voice in check. Don't get caught in the funnel of falsehoods that can be created by your character's negative self-talk. Now, if you need to teach your inner critic, do it. Write down the repeated statements, the things that you hear said over and over again. Oh, I can't do that. I'm not worth doing this. Or why would I bother doing that? When you hear those repeated statements, write those things down and challenge them and reteach and reframe those statements for your inner voice. Step number 3, thoughts are not always reality. And I suppose we're looking at doing that in step 2 a little bit too, but do a fact check. When you start thinking things, make sure you do your research and find out, is it really true? Because a lot of the things that we put in our heads, or that we have in our heads, are things that maybe we've crafted for ourselves. And we need to make sure that we do a fact check and we know or work out whether or not it is actually true. Number 4. This is an interesting one, and I have tried it. I'm not that great at it, but I'm going to keep trying it because I do see how it can be really effective. So try using your own name in the third person, or when you're talking to yourself, rather than saying I am, why don't you say Kelly is? All right. So Kelly is really struggling at the moment, rather than I am really struggling. It can take away that ownership of that feeling and help you perhaps come up with a solution for it, which can be easier for you to cope with. And sometimes too, when you put a name to something, it's not all about you, it's about someone else. And we're often so much better at giving other people advice and helping other people feel better about themselves. So why not do it for ourselves? Step number 5, or the 5th strategy, is to surround yourself with positive people. Now, you may have heard this before, but we become the sum of the 5 people that we spend the most time with. And if you don't like what they're saying or doing, then why not make a change? Be prepared to grow and be prepared to step away from something that doesn't serve you. You need to be able and be courageous enough to become who you aspire to be, rather than bringing other people down to your level. Because if we're constantly pulling people back, we're never going to achieve what we want to achieve. We're literally creating our own glass ceiling, and that's not what we want for ourselves in life. We have fought for years and years to get rid of a glass ceiling. Why do we do that to ourselves all of the time, and why do we do it to others? Let's get amongst people who want to lift people up and push out the glass ceiling, get rid of the barriers that we have, and encourage each other to grow. Be brave and remove yourself from people who aren't serving you. So number 6, and I love this one, and I totally, I do this. I have to say, this is one of my favorite things to do to get out of my own head or to change the way that I'm speaking to myself. It's exercise regularly and get outside in nature. Now, in doing this, whether you put something positive in your ears, this can be, and that's equivalent to changing the people that you're hanging out with, by the way. Find a great podcast or listen to some music that's really uplifting and motivational and encouraging for yourself, and get outside and move your body. All of those things in combination can do wonderful things for the way that you feel about yourself, and therefore change the inner voice. So, so important. Don't feed the inner critic by giving it what it wants. Feed the inner critic in a way that gives you what you need. And the last one is keep a journal of gratitude and for affirmations. Now, you might write this down, and that's a wonderful way of doing it, absolutely. I tend to do a lot of this just by I use my social media as a way of doing this, by sharing the things that really connect with me. And so not only am I, connecting with it personally, but I'm sharing it so other people might enjoy that as well. But also, one thing inside this journal, and where you're noting down your gratitude and your affirmations, share your visions for the future. Share what you learned from what happened today. Share how you are grateful from those lessons, whether it was from a success or from a failure, because we'll learn either way. And be grateful for those lessons, and really note down how they're going to help you into your envisioned future, the thing that you really want to, the person that you want to be in your future, the things that you want to achieve in your future. How are these things helping you in that direction? And writing this down, and that I love the neuromuscular connection there of writing things down, can be so valuable in the way that we talk to ourselves and the way that we see a situation, and in changing our perception. So today I encourage you to take one step in the right direction and create a new conversation inside your own mind. Remember, it starts with you because you are in charge. You are the creator of your inner voice, and you need to make sure that you and your inner voice have a wonderful relationship that support each other. So that's it from me today, guys. I hope that you have a fantastic week, and I look forward to chatting with you next time on Kel's Big Picture.